Hi everyone, welcome to our fourth episode of our video series Cut It Out COVID, where our mission here is to talk about the straight data about what's happening with the coronavirus situation and explain in a balanced way, one that takes into account all the different needs of society, and also cutting through a lot of the bluster and the misinformation that's out there to give you the real information about what's affecting our society, across the country and of course across the world, and myself as a practicing medical oncologist to also be directly involved with a lot of these things from personal experience, as well as talking to my extensive network across the country of colleagues that are also deeply involved on the research side as well as the front lines as well. So today we're going to be talking about vaccines. Vaccines, of course, is a hot topic. Naturally, the vaccines, as of this recording, on February 6, 2021, we have had on the market now for about 6 going on 7 weeks or so in the United States. So clearly, one very crucial topic about what's the deal with them, what's the mechanism, what's the data, what's the safety, and also the other big thing we're going to talk about today is the rollout, so-called vaccine rollout in the United States. And I'm going to show you how the vaccine rollout has actually gone overall quite well. It's actually gone overall quite well, which is, of course, not what you'd hear from a lot of sources out there in the media and so forth, unfortunately, which is a disservice to the public and public confidence and morale for sure, like some of what we talked about in episode number 3 of ImmuneKicks, our series from the previous episode. So please check that out also if you haven't seen it already. So we're going to be talking about the vaccine, the data, safety, efficacy, etc., some of the rationale and logic, as well as the vaccine rollout and where we are right now, and also where we stand versus other countries across the world as well, to kind of underline and emphasize that point. Now, as of right now, over 30 million people have been vaccinated with either 1 or 2 doses of the 2 vaccine candidates that are authorized in the United States, the Pfizer BioNTech one and the Moderna product. So both of these have been authorized for so-called emergency use authorization because of the situation we're in right now and the urgent need to stabilize the coronavirus situation so we can hopefully go back to normalcy as soon as is feasible. And again, like we've talked about in past episodes, we're definitely on the right track. We're getting there, just that unfortunately these things don't happen overnight, but we're definitely on the right path, as we've talked about in detail before as well. So now what's great is that we're already at this kind of mark. Over 30 million people have received 1 or 2 doses thus far of one or the other candidate, one or the other vaccine, the Pfizer one or the Moderna one. So that's great. I mean, you're talking about roughly 10% of the country has already received the vaccine, in terms of individual people across the country, which is fantastic, given that it's only 6 weeks in as of this recording. And secondly is that, remember, until recently, it is a very restricted group who was receiving the vaccination. Phase 1A, so-called. So doctors, nurses, other frontline workers, nursing home personnel, as well as nursing home residents. And so because of that, you had a very restricted number of people who were even eligible for the vaccine, so number one. Secondly, now in the last couple weeks, now we're rolling out to the more broader population, starting with certain groups like the elderly, so-called elderly. So in some places that's defined as 75 years or older. In other places, 65 or up is also eligible, like it is in North Carolina, for example. 65 or older are eligible for the vaccine. So people have been very robustly receiving the vaccine, and so, which is good, which is really, really good, and we'll explain why that's crucial in just a moment as well. Now, separately, as an important, aside to this, is that why did we come to this point, of needing vaccination? Now, like we've talked about in past episodes, the biggest problem right now is the prevalence of the virus in the population. So thankfully, roughly about 2% or less in the country have coronavirus right now. More people have had it, in aggregate since the beginning, but roughly 2% have had it. 2% have it right now. Therefore, 98% of people right now in the country do not have coronavirus at this moment. In North Carolina, less than 1% by the official numbers have coronavirus infection currently, an active case currently. So that's reassuring, I think. But the problem is still the prevalence is so much because we have such a big country. The prevalence is so much, so that's why the virus just bounces around person to person. So it goes through one person, infects other people. Every person will infect 1 or 2 or maybe even more people potentially because of exposures. Some of these are asymptomatic carriers that never get diagnosed. Others are symptomatic people, and others are caught by screening tests like the PCR tests and so forth. And we talked about the pitfalls of those tests as well, like in episode number 2 of our series. So because of that reason, because the prevalence is so much, it's become one of these situations in the country that the virus is simply not going to just go away on its own. I mean, it's already been 11 months going on, maybe even more, maybe even a year plus, depending on when the real origin was, when the virus came to the United States from China. And so because of that reason, we don't even know how long it's been, but regardless, it's roughly a year. And it hasn't, it's obviously not gone away in a year, and it's not going to suddenly go away in the next few weeks either. So it's one of those things that, again, underscoring my, discussion about how the prevalence is the critical problem right now, and therefore, when the prevalence is this much, when push comes to shove for any kind of like viral pathogen, bacterial, whatever, then when push comes to shove, the answer ultimately is give people immunity. If people are immune, then it becomes almost, not exactly, but almost a moot point. And that's the idea behind the vaccination. So while, I, as a physician, I wasn't hoping that suddenly we need to roll out a vaccine program, but given the prevalence, given the fact that in spite of all the other efforts thus far, the virus is simply not going to simply go away. It's definitely not going to go away just by wearing a mask. I'll tell you that right now. So because of that reason, what we have going on right now is that we need to give people population immunity. We need to achieve sufficient numbers of people that have immunity pre-existing. So right now what's happening is that, 2% of the population right now has coronavirus. So, and some more, less than 10% of the country has immunity based on the number of cases that have been officially diagnosed since the get-go, which is roughly about 27 million. So because of that reason, there's simply not enough people who are already immune that can stop the chain of transmission of the virus. And that's the problem. The virus itself cannot live, it cannot exist without a host to infect. A host, medically speaking, means a person. I mean, if it is an animal infection, it would mean, dogs or whatever. But in the case of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, we're talking about people that have to get infected. So the virus can't live on its own. It has to infect a person, and that's how it survives and keeps spreading. And right now, there aren't enough people who have pre-existing immunity, so the virus, almost unmitigated, keeps jumping onto the next person, infecting the next person. Some are asymptomatic completely, as we've talked about. A significant number, probably millions, literally, is some of the estimates based on the literature that have been studied so far. So because of that reason, by giving people a pre-existing immunity via a vaccine, then we can stop it in its tracks successfully, because the virus may be out there. It might be out there in the world, in the environment, but if enough people are immune, having pre-existing antibodies and so forth to prevent infection, then you stop it in its tracks, right? The virus can't survive without a host to spread to. The virus will simply peter out, so to speak. So that's the idea, the philosophy behind why we're doing this, why the vaccine is such a good idea. And, it's not that every single last person needs a vaccine. That's the other good news over here, is that not every single last person in America needs a vaccine, because the key thing is that we need enough people to have pre-existing immunity to kind of break the chain. Now, nobody knows exactly what that number is. Is it, 30% of the population, 40%, 60%? Nobody really knows. A lot of these things that have been studied, and you hear these kind of numbers thrown out there, is conjecture and hypothesis, and based on sometimes small studies and so forth. Nobody really knows. Some of this is based on mathematical modeling as well. But suffice to say that you need some substantial number that's clearly higher than the number that we've had thus far. So therefore, what's happening right now is that we're rapidly building up population immunity via the vaccine. So again, in only 6 weeks, just 6 weeks, we have over 30 million people per the CDC that currently have had 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine. And I'll show you that right now, just to show you for a second about that. And here I'm going to show you right at this moment. Okay, so over here, this is from the CDC website right now, online at the moment, on the, tracking the current data. So this is as of February 6th, 6 a.m. It might be a little bit hard to read, but I'm circling it with my mouse right now. And 59 million doses have been delivered overall, and over 30 million have received 1 or more doses. So that's absolutely huge. I mean, the fact that we're 6 weeks in, and we're seeing this many people already having had the vaccine, that's huge. And again, that's already another 10%. And so that is, where we stand right now. So now let's start by switching gears to how the vaccine works. There's been a lot of, again, hoopla, misinformation about that as well. So the line that's been kind of put out there, which is scientifically accurate as far as what it says, it's an mRNA vaccine. So the problem, the disservice about this is that it gives the public, I think, the wrong idea. I mean, the public, after all, smart people, plenty of smart people out there, but, you may not be biology researchers or medical professionals, obviously. So like anything else, you got to speak the lingo. As a quick aside, that's why the MRI scan, the magnetic resonance imaging scan that's used, in medicine, the MRI scan, technically it's NMRI scan, nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. So a few decades ago, when MRI scans were being approved and being utilized in the U.S., starting to be utilized in the U.S., the decision was made from a more of a public perception side that let's drop the nuclear part of it and just call it MRI. So magnetic resonance imaging is really NMRI. It's NMR technology, as anybody who has a organic chemistry background will know. So, by a similar rationale, I think this mRNA kind of thing is scientifically accurate, but it sometimes can be quite misleading. So you hear all kinds of, really outlandish kind of things out there as far as what it's going to do. It's going to change your DNA, and your DNA will be different than your parents now, and all that kind of stuff, which is completely false. Basically, all it is, think of it this way. Anybody, human beings, viruses, bacteria, your pet, anybody, you're made of genetic code. All your instructions about how your cells are, the color of your hair, all that kind of stuff, your height, those things they're encoded in your DNA, right? So in your DNA, or in the cases of other things like viruses, for example, RNA. So the idea is that when somebody's exposed to a pathogen, like let's say a virus, technically you're infected by a long string of RNA, or genetic code. So we don't talk about it that way, but that's kind of basically what's happening. So what the scientists who developed this did that was pretty brilliant is that they said, okay, well, let's, instead of giving the traditional approach of giving an entire virus, inactivated virus, and giving that to a person to try to induce their immune system to build immunity. Instead, what we're going to do is just give a one isolated part of the virus. So instead of, like, let's say, for example, if there were 100 what they call base pairs, 100 kind of like bits of that RNA that encodes the entire coronavirus. Instead, we're just going to give 8 of them, just 8 out of the 100, and then inject that into a patient, via the vaccine, into the deltoid muscle, and then the immune system reacts and learns to recognize that key part of the genetic code that is part of that key infectiousness part of the genetic code. So the mRNA, the RNA that's been put in a way, so it can be delivered in a fluid, in a vaccine, that RNA encodes the key infecting part of the coronavirus, what's called the spike protein. So that's what infects cells, once you inhale it and it goes into your lung circulation and so forth, and that's what leads to eventually infection. So the idea was that, okay, well, let's train our immune system to recognize that particular infecting part that's a signature of the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus specifically, and therefore build up immunity in people by training your immune system to recognize that particular mRNA sequence. So that's the idea. So the other analogy I like to use for my patients is that, think of it like saying, if you're going to tell the local police department about how to catch a bad guy, you don't need to bring the bad guy in to show them, say, oh, here's the guy, here's what he we need a full-size picture of the guy to show what the guy looks like. No, you might need just like a face, a picture, like a mugshot, so to speak, and a fingerprint maybe, So by giving that fingerprint information plus the guy's picture, the thief or the perpetrator's picture, then the police have the information they need, just very basically speaking, obviously, to go out and catch the person that they're after, right? So this is the same idea. Instead of giving the whole virus, we're simply going to give the fingerprint. The fingerprint is this unique spike protein that's part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that normally leads to infection, infecting the person's cells, infecting a human being's cells. So that's the idea. So the brilliant part about it is that the vaccine doesn't have to give an entire coronavirus, because there were some fears, during development that, well, if we give a coronavirus in the vaccine that's inactivated, what if it causes clinical infection in too many people? given that it was a newer strain of coronavirus, again, there are many other coronaviruses. This is simply one of the newest strains of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 is. So therefore, that was the idea, is to say we're simply going to give our immune system this evidence of this fingerprint and then train the immune system to recognize that fingerprint and then develop antibodies against a particular spike protein, and that's how it works. So hopefully that's helpful, and it helps you get clear about what is the nature of this so-called mRNA vaccine that's been thrown out there as far as like this name, this kind of concept out there. It doesn't change your DNA. It doesn't make your DNA different than your parents. You're not going to somehow be changed, genetically. It doesn't work like that. Injecting the genetic code of anything, a virus that infects your body, it doesn't change your DNA. The body doesn't work like that, simply put. So it can't just recode your body just because you get a vaccine that has an RNA. And that's why I say this analogy of that a virus is really a much longer string of RNA. We're simply going to give a short snippet of that, which is going to be the fingerprint that's going to tell your immune system, hey, we don't need to give you the whole virus. Look for this particular signature, this fingerprint. Then your immune system will develop antibodies to, once it recognizes that virus, that if you're exposed to it, to use your antibodies to prevent an infection, prevent that SARS-CoV-2 virus from infecting your lung cells and so forth in the body. Now, jumping to the vaccine efficacy, this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine just back in December, giving the full results. And some of you probably heard that the vaccine effectiveness in terms of preventing clinical infection is about 90 to 95%, quite impressive, clearly impressive. And so, initially when the vaccine was being developed, a lot of us were happy. We would have been happy if it was 60%, 70%, maybe 60% might have been cutting it close. But if it was like 70%-ish or better, I would have been happy. I know a lot of my colleagues who are infectious disease specialists, they would have been fairly satisfied and said, okay, given the situation, we need to get this under control, get people's lives back on track, etc. We need something with reasonable efficacy, effectiveness to prevent clinical infection. And that's what we've achieved, is that it's not simply that level, it's 90 to 95% effective with a very, very low side effect rate. So let me switch gears over here and show you that paper as well. I'm going to show you the Pfizer vaccine one over here, so you can see what that looks like. And showing it to you right now. So this is a paper that was published back in December, and is safety and efficacy. This is the medical name of it, BNT162b2 mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. And there was a lot of researchers across the world that were involved with this, including the key companies Pfizer and BioNTech. So to scroll down, so to get to the point of it is that, so first of all, by the way, 42% of people were over age 55, which is significant. We want older people on this study, not simply younger people. And a lot of trials will have younger people because it's easier to enroll, younger, healthier people on a study. But a lot of older people were there as well. So the COVID-19 vaccine effectiveness from this paper, for example, is, you can see COVID-19 occurrence at least 7 days after the second dose in participants with and those without evidence of infection. So when you compare those that have clinical evidence of infection and those that don't, it is a 44,000 patient study, so roughly about 22,000 patients in each arm. So in the analyzed and reported numbers thus far, you can see in the 20,000 people on the vaccine arm, 20,000 people in the placebo arm, 9 out of 20,000 developed actual COVID-19 infection, SARS-CoV-2 infection, versus 169 on the placebo arm. So comparatively, that's a 94.6% reduction in the incidence of coronavirus infection in the vaccine group, and therefore that's the basis for that number. So very significant, number one. Number two is that the side effect rate was almost the same for serious side effects between the two groups. It was 0.6% for the It is 0.6% for the vaccine arm and 0.5% for the placebo arm as far as serious adverse events. So when people talk about serious adverse events in a clinical trial sense, they mean a side effect that needed doctors or medical personnel to intervene and manage a particular side effect, and may even warrant hospitalization, so therefore could be quite serious. So the incidence of those kind of more severe effects, where somebody would have to call up their doctor and say, hey, what do I do? I'm having side effect A, B, or C. What should I do to help ameliorate the side effect? And the answer was that 0.6% of people, that's less than 1%, had such a side effect on the vaccine arm versus 0.5% on the placebo arm. So that's why we have placebo comparators, right? We want to say, is it 0.6% versus 0.1%, like 6 times as much? No, it's 0.6% versus 0.5%. So, definitely reassuringly low. That's number 2. Now let me go back to the paper over here and show you something else that's quite interesting. So this vaccine has to be given in 2 doses. The first dose, and then 21 days later, the second dose, which is essentially a booster dose. It's the same dosage of the vaccine, but a second dose of it, and that effectively confers a booster effect, leading to higher antibody titer generation, antibody level generation in the human body, and more specific antibodies against a given pathogen, like in this case, SARS-CoV-2. So let me cut back to this is a very interesting piece of the paper over here, is right here. So when patients got at least 1 dose, and if it was, not just the few days right after the dose, between dose 1 and dose 2, but if they got at least 1 dose, then the effectiveness to prevent clinical infection was actually 82%. Look at the top line over here. In the short time period where it's after dose 1, before dose 2, 52.4%. So as time goes along, the effectiveness improves. So if you're going to get an infection, it's going to happen early on because the vaccine hasn't kicked in, so to speak, right? So you can see after dose 1, if you've gotten only 1 dose for some reason, 82% is the effectiveness. If you're greater than or equal to 7 days after dose 2, then 94.8% is the effectiveness, 95% overall. And that's what's illustrated graphically up here, is that those that had infection were in the first 7 to 14 days while the vaccine is still kicking in. So it makes sense, right? That while the vaccine hasn't kicked in just yet, you still see a very similar rate between the blue placebo arm and the red vaccine arm, a very similar rate for the first week and a half or so. Then the curve split very widely, where the further episodes of COVID-19 infection were very low in the vaccine arm versus the steady ongoing increase of clinical infection that was caught by the people who were on the placebo arm. And so I think that's very reassuring that, number one, it's very effective, 95% reduction in the risk of severe infections. The side effect rate is super low, 0.6% for those serious adverse events that would require doctor intervention, possibly even a hospital visit, etc. And on that note, the number of people that got hospitalized on the vaccine arm, total, in the 22,000 people on the study vaccine arm on the study that we just talked about on the paper we just showed, was only one person. So not that it can't happen, but the incidence of that, when you talk about 1 out of 22,000, I mean, it's one of those things. As a doctor talking to patients and counseling patients, I like those odds that my patients will, very large chance, they'll be okay. And naturally we look case by case, and we still stay on guard just in case. But overall, the numbers for the broader population are quite reassuring, clearly based on this publication and what the data. And this is the basis for why the FDA gave this authorization, this emergency use authorization for this one, as well as the Moderna product as well. So now the critical thing is about who should get them, So the key people that really, really need to get it are the high-risk people, immunocompromised, lung disease, significant cardiovascular disease, etc. The elderly should get them, So, the word is always funny to me, what's called elderly, but, they use this word, broadly in medical speak, casually. But really, anybody who's over 65 or older, definitely 70 or older, really should get the vaccine, because as we've talked about in past episodes as well, as data has been reported clearly, that those that are in the 70-plus age group in the country are at much higher risk for severe complications of coronavirus infection if they were to catch it. So that's number 2. And the third main group is the high exposure group. Doctors, nurses, frontline workers, nursing home personnel, flight attendants, teachers, etc. People that have those kind of jobs and roles, they also need it, because they're going to be around many, many people. Think about a flight attendant. They're going to be around literally hundreds of people a day as part of their normal course of work. So that's why those people, are going to be part of the earlier groups that are getting it. So hence this tier system that's been rolling out across the country is that there's a reason why certain people get it first and other people get it later. Because like we've talked about before, the people who are, let's say, less than age 50, don't have one of those significant risk factors, immunocompromised state, lung disease, heart disease, etc. Those people, their risk of severe complications of COVID, especially dying from COVID, are extremely low, way, way below 1%. So because of that reason, that's why they can, and when we talk about these population decisions, that's why it's, okay in a sense for those people to wait. The younger, healthier people, if they choose to get the vaccine and they get it in May or April, that's probably okay. I mean, there's a very, very high chance that they're going to be fine between now and April or May or whenever they get it, So in that way, don't be concerned if you don't get it right away, the vaccination, but at least the key people really, really need to get it. The elderly, the high risk groups, as well as the high exposure people like doctors and nurses and teachers and flight attendants, etc. So that's really the key about who should be getting it. Now, as a quick aside, before we go to the last part of this, which is the rollout, the quick aside is that the different strains that have been reported. So now, first of all, the main strain of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 virus that's in the United States right now, February 2021, is not the same strain that was there that originally came from Wuhan, China, back beginning of last year or end of 2019. So that's a critical point as well, is that there are already multiple strains. This is a known thing. If you heard the news, you would make it sound like it's, this brand new thing that just happened, but that's not true at all. There have already been multiple strains that have been identified. And again, the main strain in the United States is not the same strain that's originally was discovered in China. So because of that reason, it's not surprising. The viruses mutate. The viruses have short lifespans. They mutate. That's normal course of viral immunology, is that the viruses will mutate in some form or another. Now, early reports from Pfizer that were reported just a couple weeks ago are that it looks like, as part of the subset of some of these patients that have been studied on their vaccine product, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, it appears to be effective and generating antibodies similarly in those variants compared to the overall group. So strain to strain, there's always going to be some differences, right? It's not going to be identical. Let's think about, for example, the pneumonia vaccine, right? The pneumonia vaccine, one of the common ones is called Prevnar 13. That's what the brand name that's used. So they call it Prevnar 13 because that particular pneumonia vaccine, pneumococcal vaccine, it inoculates for 13 different strains of pneumonia. So, and that's not to say that's inclusive of all strains, period. But those are the 13 main strains that have been studied and analyzed and maybe infecting people at risk in the country for getting pneumonia with strep pneumonia. So because of that reason, 13 strains. So that's why this, strain to strain, there are going to be some differences. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you're not going to have identical responses across all strains, but they're broadly similar. And the early signs are that it looks like the same is going on for this case as well, like the United Kingdom new strain that's been reported, the South African strain, and there's going to be others. I mean, this is normal. And the good thing is that if necessary, because of this fingerprint technology of the COVID vaccine, you can quickly modify it and say, okay, we're going to have this new string of RNA elements that's going to encode the vaccine for next year, and that's okay. It's easy to modify and roll out a new vaccine now that we know the safety and efficacy is quite effective, like we just talked about. So now the last part of our discussion is going to be about the rollout. So the big picture, the rollout has gone overall very, very well. So again, you would not hear this in a lot of media outlets, which is, it's simply not true. The rollout has gone overall very, very well. And, point one is that over 30 million people in America have gotten 1 or 2 doses already in just the first 6 weeks, even though, like we just talked about earlier, it's only been a restricted group, that phase 1A group, for the first several weeks. And then the last couple weeks, throughout the country, now we're allowing other people to be involved as well, like the people that are 65 and older, some places 75 and older, etc. But having 30 million already is already a significant milestone that's been achieved in just 6 weeks of time, which is fantastic. And let me put it in perspective a different way. in the past year, since the very beginning when we've been tracking the coronavirus statistics, roughly 27 million Americans have been officially diagnosed with coronavirus, from start till now. So, but yet in only 6 weeks, we have beaten that number. We've exceeded that number with the vaccination. 30 million people, over 30 million people have received 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine, and yet in the past whole year, it took a whole year to reach 27 million, which has already been surpassed by the vaccine in only 6 weeks. That's the power of vaccination. That's the power of vaccine programs to build up immunity across the country. You can wait for, these people who have been infected and the 27 million that have been infected, and those, of course, other than sadly the people that have passed away, but the people, all the overwhelming majority that have been recovered fine and now are, several months post their infection, those people have immunity, and we've seen multiple studies, that's a whole different discussion, but multiple studies show, including the biggest one of over 40,000 people that have been followed, that immunity lasts for at least 7 months. And again, we don't have years of follow-up because the virus hasn't been known for years, but at least 7 months the antibodies do persist, which is good to see. But again, in only 6 weeks, we've surpassed the immunity that was conferred by just getting coronavirus infection. It took a year to get to 27 million, and in just 6 weeks, we've already surpassed that with vaccination. And that's the power and speed of vaccines. That's why population immunity can be achieved in literally just a few months compared to what it would take, potentially years for coronavirus to go just by natural infection through the population. So that is a very good sign that here, 27 million plus another 30 million plus already right now, February 6, 2021. So we already are at roughly about 57 million, plus the other asymptomatic individuals that have not been diagnosed. 27 million people officially have coronavirus, and there are many estimates about how many others are asymptomatic and not diagnosed throughout the country. And it could be a third of the number, it could be less, it could be more. Nobody, of course, really knows. It's postulated and is studied from small studies, but people do conservatively estimate that it's going to be something in the several million across the country that have had it, over the past year plus and have been asymptomatic or never got formally diagnosed. So you probably have 60 million plus right now, as of February 2021, that have immunity conferred by either natural coronavirus infection or vaccination, one or the other. And that's phenomenal. So this is the key step to getting to population immunity, is getting enough people that have these antibodies formed, pre-existing immunity formed by vaccination. So therefore, the virus will be stopped in its tracks. If it tries to spread to the person with robust antibodies, like is conferred by the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, then you're not going to get infected. Overwhelming chance you won't be infected. And even if you do get infected, the chance you're going to have a serious case that results in a hospitalization is exceedingly rare, like we talked about in the New England Journal paper, one person out of 22,000. So, pretty, if that's the ratio, even roughly, plus or minus a tiny bit, that's very, very good and very promising. So, therefore, it's very realistic to estimate that over the next few months, we're going to see the population immunity number, that natural infection total plus vaccinated population total, to be well over 100 million, maybe 150 million plus over the next few months. So again, even if every single person doesn't get the vaccine, which is naturally that won't happen, it's not that suddenly every single last man, woman, and child needs a vaccine. But as long as enough people get it and the right groups are getting it, we will have substantial population immunity, and that will stop coronavirus in its tracks. So that's why the vaccination, effort is so huge, and the fact that the data, critically, is reassuring, very reassuring as well, that it's consistent with a very good risk-benefit ratio based on the numbers that I just showed you from the paper. And the last main point I'm going to talk about is how it compares to other countries. So the United States has done well, not only the fact that we already have 30 million plus, that have received a vaccine, people in the U.S. that have received a vaccine, but furthermore is that very few countries in the whole world are vaccinating at a rate as fast as the United States. So this idea of the vaccine rollout being, flawed and, not working and all this kind of stuff, totally misconstrued. So let me show you over here. I'm going to show you something very interesting, which is that very few countries have vaccinated at a faster rate than the United States. And this, you can see, those few countries are Israel, which has done a great job. The United Kingdom, so they separate them over here. United Kingdom, of course, consists of England and Wales and Northern Ireland, but they have them in separate, ones. So England, UK, Wales, Northern Ireland, they're all part of the same naturally. Cayman is a UK territory as well. Jersey, Scotland, these are all UK territories. And then if you go through the United Kingdom associated ones, United States. So I'm sorting this by the most frequent, and the other one is Seychelles, in the Indian Ocean. And the UAE is the other one. So Israel, the UAE, the United Kingdom, and then the United States. I mean, you're talking about we are ahead of everybody in Europe, besides the United Kingdom. So just to show that we are doing a very good job, not only in terms of the fact that we have vaccinated a significant number across the country. And this is just a map that shows in a big picture way, the darker ones have a higher vaccine rate. And you can see the United States shaded blue, and it's a little bit hard to see, of course, but the UK is one of the other dark blue ones that you see over there as well. The other dark blue one in the Mideast is the UAE. So anyway, so again, just to show that the U.S. has done very, very well with the vaccine rollout. It's going well. I mean, there's always inefficiencies in these kind of things, and that's natural. I mean, it's not like every person immediately, the vaccine gets shipped from the manufacturing plant, goes on the truck, gets injected immediately upon arriving at a given facility. Naturally, it doesn't work that way, right? There's always some real-world inefficiencies, but overall, I think we're off to a flying start, doing great, and really doing quite well, especially compared to other countries. I mean, besides the UK, which has done a great job as well, no European country is on par with the United States as far as the speed of the rollout in terms of the number per 100 people in the population that's being vaccinated. So hopefully this is informative and reassuring for you guys as far as the ins and outs of the vaccine and why this is going to be one of the key linchpins that's going to get us out of the situation and stabilize the coronavirus situation successfully in the coming months. And also, this is yet one more reason that, why our argument has been that we can approach this in a much more balanced way now is that because even right now, cases have been dropping. For example, the case rates have been dropping in the country, but, plus the vaccine rolling out very nicely. So because of that, we can really very smartly keep on balancing society, kids going to school, people going to work, be smart, use certain precautions, but then being able to go about your day-to-day lives is critical, again, for all these reasons we've talked about in terms of balancing the pillars of society. We need to allow people to go about their lives safely and not just be in these things that don't make any sense, in terms of practicality, like denying kids education and denying work opportunities and hurting businesses, etc. It's really not for the public good, clearly, as well. So with that, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to our video series, Cut It Out COVID, if you've enjoyed it as well. And hopefully you found it very informative. We try to be very data-driven. We want to be reassuring. We want to show that we are approaching this in a much more balanced way, which I really, really believe we can do safely and successfully because of all the amazing knowledge we've gathered over the past year. So because of that reason, I think we're well on our way to success in stabilizing the coronavirus situation, and the vaccine is going to be one more key linchpin as far as getting us to where we want to be. Lastly, accurate knowledge is power. So that's been our saying, accurate knowledge is power. And, it's about moving beyond the noise, understanding the real details about this as educated, concerned citizens across the country. So again, hopefully you found this very helpful. See you next episode. Always great to speak to all you guys and hear your feedback. And have a great one. We'll see you very soon. Thank you very much.